Yes,
Zoom
we got
recording.
this.
And hi, Jackie. So multitasking, the letting people in the room and recording the call. And hopefully Eric is pulling up the, Eric, are you pulling up the agenda? Maybe?
I am working on it, but yes, it'll be up shortly and I'll throw that in the chat window.
That sounds great. Okay, great. I am slowly letting people into the room. It's nice to see everybody. Eliza, I thought about you the other day. Eric's going to help do the greater than the sum thing. Have you gotten, we may do that for ESHIP. So I'm going to want to pick your brain because you sat through the presentation. So Eric and Jeff and Enoch are going to sit through the presentation and we're going to try to map it. So hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know, having this side conversation about a social mapping tool. So we will see what that looks like. And
Now
the
I
whole,
remember there were so many webinars. I was like, which webinar was that? Got it.
yes, so many, how many people have been to like way more webinars than they ever expected to be in their life? Okay. So the social mapping tool is something that I want to explore to see if we can get the connections to be visual for the ESHIP community. So it'll be really interesting. I don't know how that'll go. For those of you who are curious about communication tools, I'm going to invite you all to come on Wednesday to the Connected Networks call because we're going to talk about community communication tools and such. So that'll be great. Hi, Chad. I don't know what time it is for you.
It's a bit early. It's not too bad. It's only 5.
Oh, okay. You're such a trooper. And then, I don't know, is Christina, are you joining us from Europe?
Yes, from France.
And it is what time in France now?
Now it's 9 p.m.
At all kinds. So thank you all. Thank you, Eric, for putting the document into the chat. And Norris, it's good to have you here too. So, quick popcorn question. And I will see if we can, I don't know if we want to put this into into the chat and then we can just capture it, I'll cut and paste it into the window. So tell us about an interesting webinar you've been on. Good, bad, indifferent. Like, tell us about an interesting whatever you've done since COVID. Like, what is it that you've done that's good, and what have you done that's not so good, and maybe we can get a range of things that okay. So Christina's already contributed. Thank you. Are you going to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down? I won't. No. All right. So Christina, you have to say it. You have to call on the next person then.
Okay. I have to describe the event, or I have a...
No, that's all right. I think I think for the interest of time, I will have all of you type into the chat an interesting, tell us, or name a webinar or virtual session. All right. I don't know what, okay, now you're going to have to, I don't know what 42 and 44 mean. You will have to explain that. Are you naming how many?
42 is the is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, that's right. Is it 42 or 44?
42. But at the end of the last book, they said, what was the question that 42 is the answer to is, what is 6 times 8? And the reply is, I knew the universe was messed up. So anyway.
And CJ says 44. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what the heck are they talking about, it's Douglas Adams, and everybody should read those books. So it's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. Did I get that right?
Botanic.
And thanks to the fish. All right. Then, oh, I'm letting more people in. Who is in charge today? Is that you, Chad?
Yeah, I'm happy to run it.
All right. Did everybody contribute what interesting thing they've been on recently? Ish? Do you want to actually flesh out that question, or do we want to just go ahead and get started?
Well,
Well,
I just got up a webinar with Nigeria, and one of the people they had invited was the head of Global Entrepreneurship Week in Macedonia, even though she's actually in Poland, which was sort of confusing. But a week ago, we had a brilliant webinar that spun out of some of the ICSB stuff. We had the head of the National Chamber of Commerce, the head of their innovation fund. We had the finance minister sitting in, and out of 60 people, probably nearly 50 of them were actually entrepreneurs on the call talking about ecosystem building. Interestingly, the GEW head for Macedonia declined to attend, which made today a little interesting. But what was fascinating is if you get the entrepreneurs on the call, it's only been a week, and there are 3 initiatives already starting on the ground over there that got triggered by this. So talking to the entrepreneurs does work.
Excellent, excellent. So for today's call, we float around a few ideas on things to talk about. A few things that are topical from the last month. The Startup Genome report came out, so we can touch on that. And we can update on some of the projects around definitions. And there's another conversation that came up as far as who actually owns the ecosystem metrics in your region, which is one that's been floating around as well, and something that we're working on over here in Australia. We don't have that large of a number of people on the call, so about 12 of us. It's about 10 past, and I'm conscious of time. What I'd love to do is because it's a bit of a smallish number, I wouldn't mind just going around the room real quick and hearing a bit from who you are and where you're from, and also what your interest is in metrics and what you do as far as measurement and impact in your area. So just all of that in about 2 minutes if we can. So just briefly around the room, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and what your interest is in metrics and how that applies to what you do there. So just those 3 points if we can touch on. And Christina, since it's a bit late and you're a bit on the other side of the world from a few of us, maybe if you just kick off and then select who you'd like to go next.
So yeah, I come from France. Here is 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. And the metrics, what we say, some of the metrics are public-oriented institutions that have mainly access. For me, I know that during my PhD, I was interested in metrics about business incubators. And by that time, we didn't have the numbers of how many incubators are and how many companies they create to calculate all that. I think there are more and more data sets that provide these numbers. However, we don't have access yet. So if you hear about data sets on this metrics, I would be interested.
Great. Thanks, Christina. And who's next for you?
Monica. Monica, are you there?
Yes. So for me, my name is Monica Walters, and I'm from CNM Ingenuity in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'm a program director, so I run a variety of programs dealing with startups, whether it be accelerator programs or incubator programs, things that help startups. And mainly I'm concerned for metrics for a couple reasons. One, like what we should be using to determine if our programs are successful, both internally as well as when we apply for grants, what we could put in there to use as a metric to show them or to show other external people how we are successful, and what would be a good thing that is maybe across the board a good metric to use for everyone. And I'll pick Jackie to go next. Oh, you're on mute.
We don't hear you, Jackie.
Okay, that should be better, I think. Okay, good. Yeah, actually, I'm frantically looking to see who owns the metrics in the ecosystem in my province. So that's why I was a little distracted there. I've actually been kind of underwater or I guess you could say in the weeds for the past 4 years, working on my PhD. So hopefully I'm going to be emerging from that soon. I seem to have sort of stuck my head above water a little bit enough now to look back to where I come from, which is actually in the builder side as well as on the startup side. So I've done both sides and have now a greater interest in metrics with regards to those. So I've helped, for example, I've helped the province of Ontario work on figuring out metrics previously in a large strategic initiative. And I don't even know where that went because now I was sort of so busy for the last few years. So that's my interest. I'm not sure who owns them. I'm guessing it's probably public institutions like Christina has. And there's probably access to them, you know, through channels.
Right. Thanks, Jackie. Who'd you like to go next?
I'll go. My name is CJ Cornell. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Arizona has a huge ecosystem, many different components to them. The problem is that we have too many measurements and too many measurers, too many components, and we only tend to see the good stuff. People will highlight the good metrics, but won't do any comparison if we're failing in some areas. That being said, we do have, there's no singular ecosystem or responsible for it. We have our university ecosystems and our state economic development, but we have an organization, a grassroots one called Yes Phoenix, YESPHX, and I would encourage anybody to look it up and join it, which is several organizations, but it started at grassroots. And in there, we do some measurement of companies founded, companies funded, exits, number of entrepreneurs, etc. It's definitely not accurate, but it's something. So I hope that answers some of the question there.
Thanks, CJ.
But may I add one thing? One of my action items for this group is the definitions, and I will have that posted later today on the wiki, and I'll post the link on the Slack channel later today.
That's awesome. And thanks for those papers you've already posted. Those have been great. Thanks, CJ. And who would you like to go next, CJ?
Oh, I have to choose next. Did Eliza go? Okay, go ahead.
Hi all, I'm Eliza Salmon. I work at Forward Cities under the ESHIP Communities work and initiative, and I am focused on supporting efforts to measure ecosystems, specifically in Baltimore, a region in New Mexico, and in Long Beach, California. And now also do some support in the Kansas City metro area. And I feel like my work is central to the topic of the webinar. And who holds metrics? It's a range of people from private companies to public institutions, and it's a question of who has access and then also where are your gaps. And I will throw it over to Reagan.
Hey, may I ask Elijah a question before you go? How involved is Towson University out there? I know that they started a big push in entrepreneurial ecosystems a while back, but I don't know. I'm just curious about that.
Eric might know more. Do you want to pitch in, Eric?
You're talking Towson in Baltimore?
Yeah. Well, are they in Baltimore? They're outside of Baltimore, aren't they?
Yeah, that's where I remember
okay.
them from. I don't know how deeply they've been involved with that. I think it's a little bit more, let's see, John Hopkins.
They hired the economic development head from the city of Baltimore to be their entrepreneurship head. And then I didn't hear anything after that.
Yeah, I know that there's some folks from John Hopkins that have been a part of the work, but I think that they're the main university partner.
It was just a quick question. I don't want to derail the conversation here. Go ahead.
No worries.
So I think I'm next. I'm Reagan. My daytime job is a licensing officer for the tech transfer office at UCLA. It's where we create the inventions by their faculty members, and my job is to license them out. The end result is we license out a ton of different technologies to startups. We form about 20 startups a year based on UCLA stuff. The other hat that I wear that's actually more relevant is that I do all the metrics for UCLA, the tech transfer side of things, as well as an organization called Autumn, which is the national organization for people that do my job. So university ecosystems form about 1,000 startups a year, and the group that I manage and run within the Autumn organization has that data. So we actually control and own, per se, the data related to that information, as we are the ones that collect it and disseminate it. Next up,
just a quick question, Reagan, quick question on that, if I may. Do you keep track of, as part of that data management, do you keep track of your alumni as they go through, kind of where are they now from the history
alumni
of your
startups,
with
you
tech
mean?
transfer? Yeah, well, when you do the tech transfer and transfer the technology to the startups, do you keep track of what they do with it, where they go, how successful they are?
Yeah, so university, at least the type of transfer that we deal with is contractual. The university still owns the inventions. And as a result, we have licenses that we negotiate for financial benefit and for development and all of this kind of stuff. So we do have to keep track of what those startups are doing with it. They can't shelve it by policy and by law. There's a lot of laws that, in order for us to stick with compliance, don't allow us to shelve that stuff. So yeah,
do you track their
part
performance? You track their performance and how effective they are?
Internally, so not at the national level, but at UCLA, it is our responsibility to keep track of how those companies are doing. So they have reporting obligations back to the university. I talk to my startups every year, at least once, if not twice, to see how they're doing. We help them with funding. We help them with investors. We help them with connecting to CROs. We help them as much as we can. So we really do try to provide them a lot of ecosystem resources to help them get better and be able to develop that stuff.
Thanks, Trey. Who'd you like to go next?
Jen.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I'm Jen MacDonald. I'm coming to you from Alberta, Canada. I work in the academic entrepreneurship space. Up until a month ago, I was working at a university in Calgary called Mount Royal University. I worked there for 6 years, contributing to the development of high impact talent through entrepreneurial education, primarily extracurricular. As of last week, I switched to our local competitor, the University of Calgary, which has been kind of fun. Yeah. And I'm in the Vice President's Office of Research. So a few years ago, the university made the mandate to become Canada's most entrepreneurial school. So that will be a huge challenge. In terms of metrics, you know, at Mount Royal, I developed many of my own metrics, certainly trying to find the balance between some of the hardcore startup metrics, but then also understanding that sometimes it's about talent development and not always about the business, it's about the person. So that was kind of fun. Starting at the University of Calgary, quickly realizing they don't have many metrics in place. So hoping they're going to let me kind of sink my teeth into that. Not too sure though. In terms of Calgary as a whole, I'm a fellow at the Calgary Innovation Coalition that's spearheaded by Platform Calgary, and they work with Startup Genome. So lots of different types of metrics, styles of metrics, and just kind of nerdy about it. So thanks for having me.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. Who would you like to go next?
Kristen, would you like to go?
I appreciated you waiting till I was done eating my lunch because that was why I was video from lack of video there. So hi everybody, Kristen Slice. I work for Arizona State University, coming similar to CJ from Phoenix, Arizona. I work for the Entrepreneurship and Innovation team. So I've been part of these conversations for about a year now. I lead actually kind of an interesting program where I lead a community facing program. So it's called Peoria Forward. I work completely with community ventures, but I'm housed within the E&I department, which works across the university. We're a pan-university program. And so when it comes to metrics, this is the time of the year where we do get to take a little bit of a pause and figure out what our strategy looks like. We have outside funding. All of our team are grant funded. And so our funding comes directly from the city of Peoria. And so I've often talked about when you're working with funding, sometimes your metrics are dependent on what they see as valuable. So we do have traditional economic development measures that we've put in place as far as access to capital, growth. Increasingly, we're seeing interest from our funders in alignment with, are they getting additional funding past the initial funding? So not just while they're working with us, but do they go on to compete on a state level or a national level in different funding avenues? We're also starting to measure, because we have a very ecosystem development perspective, so not just working with individual ventures, but a large piece of my time is actually how do I help these ventures connect back into the ecosystem and give back. And so we're starting to look now at measures of connectivity. How many times do they attend events? Are they speakers for events? Do they give back? What is their understanding of the different resources? And so we're kind of high level defining that as connectivity. And so how do we increase individual venture impact, the overall connectivity, and do those two correlate? So that's kind of where we're currently looking and playing with when it comes to metrics and measurement.
Excellent, that's good detail. Thanks for that, Kristen. In the interest of time, I might pick the next one. And Amanda, have you gone yet?
I haven't, and I apologize for being late, and I am actually sitting in for my boss, who is Danielle Varda, and we are both from Visible Network Labs, which is located in Denver, Colorado, and is a network science and data science company. We've been partnering with Startup Colorado, which is an entrepreneurship organization, and our partnership is to try to help them measure and track their entrepreneurial networks, and so that's why I'm here.
Excellent, thanks, Amanda. That's great. And Eli, I ask you for a bit of a share.
Yes, hi Chad, good to see you and everyone. Yeah, my name is Eli David. I'm working on a nomadic blog and podcast. I'm really interested in remote work and anything that has to do with remote work. One of the things that I'm also doing is running a site called startuplink.com, which is a global startup ecosystem map and a research center. Work with about 50 governments and municipalities on the development and promotion of their ecosystem, and also with organizations like the UN. And for me, it's very interesting, you know, the metrics because we're ranking the startup ecosystems of 1,000 cities in 100 countries, I'm really interested to figure out new ways of measuring ecosystems and kind of figuring out what actually differentiates them. So I'm just here for ideas on more, let's say, elements.
Excellent. Thanks, Eli. And Norris.
Norris Kruger, Boise, Idaho, data nerd. My interest has been longstanding on how many bad metrics that are out there. Not bad because they're self-serving, some because they don't actually understand what the data claims to measure isn't. And it's such a deep problem. So one, I'm really happy that this group is doing things to get back to first principles. Alistair talking about, and Balto talking about models, Chad pushing on, and CJ working on the definitions. But this call I was just on with Nigeria, someone was presenting some metric stuff from the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and it was awful. And it was like, oh, I'm really glad it ended. I had to jump to this call because I might have said something undiplomatic. But is even when the best people are struggling with this, the potential for this group to make a huge difference is just, it's inspiring and keeps me going. So I don't see who else is on the list, but how about Mr. Meek, Dr. Meeks, the mountain climber?
Meeks said in the chat that he's on a laptop, so his mic's not there. I'll just share a little bit about what he said in the chat, though, just for the recording. He said he's in the middle of a deep dive into the local ecosystem, conducting an extensive study of the Louisiana ecosystem. He's working with SourceLink to launch a huge effort to build their regional ecosystem. They do not have metrics, and there's nothing there really to own, but as a nascent ecosystem, they're definitely crawling forward. And he also adds that the issue of service to be most critical is what are you doing and why is it important? And the follow-up is how will you measure? And it is that question a lot of us talk about, which is kind of the what and the how are the two separate conversations. Metrics demonstrate what you're actually trying to do. And as far as finding a lot of confusion and misalignment between stated metrics and stated intentions, aspirations, fighting over limited resources. So local ecosystem pundits seem to assume everybody understands why it's important and the benefit. Definitely probably things that we can all share.
I want to make a shout out here. There's a guy that's not on this call or on this video that I actually met here, and Adam Rensselaer. And it turns out I do a lot of work with the state level economic development here in Arizona, the Arizona Commerce Authority, and we've been doing for well over 10 years a broad just set of initiatives. Anyway, this guy Adam is part of a company that has a tool called Valid Eval. And now that I think of it, they give us tremendous amount of metrics, which is interesting because most of the metric generating tools I've seen talk about the outcomes, which are very, very useful, but they give us a lot of incredible metrics about the process, about how we shepherd companies through the process. And I really didn't appreciate it for 10 years until I talked to him a few weeks ago.
Thanks for that, CJ.
Glad that you met CJ. I just want to make one little note before we start talking about this chat. I think this is the first time in the history of the metrics call where there are more women than men on the call. And I think that's actually a really wonderful thing. I'm not a metrics person, but I joined the metrics committee on Startup Champions because the way that the questions are asked, the framing of things is very interesting depending on who does the framing. And that's something that we don't explore a lot of. If for those of you who've not read Invisible Women, all about the data science, that's a really wonderful book and I invite you all to read it. So, so thank you all for being here.
Excellent. Thanks, Cecilia. I mean, that really is an excellent point as far as also raises kind of the other things that we've, how do you measure, which is also measuring some of the kind of the demographics of who's in the region and kind of who's actually participating versus who's visible. Eric, have we gotten to you?
Not really, although, so I'll just say, Eric Renz-Whitmore, I'm here. I'm representing a Taos airship or Earthship and behind me. and I'm working in New Mexico with Forward Cities with the ESHIP Communities program. Eliza's my colleague and does much more of the real data related to this. I'll just say that there's a couple of things that I've been involved with that are still of interest. And one is from an economic development city perspective, how are cities and municipal governments allocating their resources to support entrepreneurs? And to what extent are they tracking, how they reach entrepreneurs by race and ethnicity, gender, location, those kinds of different aspects, in order to get a better picture of how they are dividing up the pie they have to support entrepreneurship in their areas, ideally tied with some outcomes as well. So I'll just mention that.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Eric. And I'm really glad that we did that kind of going around the room, because it highlights a lot of commonalities and a lot of distinctions in some of the challenges that we have with the work that we do. There's a lot of people that are focused on their specific programs, and so they measure the results from the lens of that program. How do I track my alumni? In order to do that, I need to find out how they're doing in the ecosystem, so that start broadening out. But we're usually funded or have a home from a base on which we focus. Eventually, it does get out to the city level, but then what does that mean for the national level? We then start leveraging other platforms such as SourceLink, which has been mentioned, Startup Genome, Startup Blink, and then assessing those on the different qualities and what do they get for us, and what particular challenges do they answer. One of the things that Meeks raised, which is really pertinent, is that always that distinction between what we measure, which is the actual metrics. We can talk about, activity versus outcomes versus process, but then how we measure, what's that methodology? And is it data mining? Is it running a survey? And the different types of surveys, from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which is just a random phone call, pick it up and say, what does this population or the economy think about entrepreneurship, versus something like Startup Genome, which says, I'm going to ask a certain group of people, but then that misses out on everybody, because the people that answer it, it tells you details about the type of people that will answer your survey as much as it does about your population. So all these challenges. And one of the ones that I'm currently playing with, I'll just share a little bit from Australia. So we've been working on a project at a national level, trying to say, that question, who owns ecosystem metrics? We're trying to create a centralized owner, because otherwise it can be very fragmented. We have 8 states and territories across Australia. Each has their own approach, if they have an approach to measuring impact. And then you get down to the local level. Some states are running Startup Genome, other states are doing their own surveys, other states just use government data and try and tap into that, which can be a bit time lagged. And so working on a strategy, 1, to increase the quality of government data, 2, to get a standardized approach for measurement, and 3, to have overarching national approaches like the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. But it's all very challenging, and whether you're going to get funding for all 3 of those is a bit of an issue. And one of the metrics I'm playing with at the moment, and I wouldn't mind just diving into it, is kind of that network effect. We're working on a place outside of Brisbane who's very strong in agriculture, has about 140,000 population. It reminds me a bit of Waterloo, just outside of Toronto as far as distance. So it's kind of an outer city type narrative, but strong in some things that they do. And I've been watching Communitech pretty closely, but they've been going for some time, and we're just building out the ecosystem in this area. And one of the metrics that we're playing with is, we started comparing it to other ecosystems. And there's a narrative that when I go to a certain ecosystem like San Francisco or Israel, there's this narrative that I can get my answer pretty rapid. If I'm sitting in a cafe, within 3 conversations, I can get what I want. Within 3 weeks, I can get to a yes or a no, and I can either get shut down, which is healthy, or I can continue on to that next stage. And so I'm playing with a metric of 3. Maybe we ramp it down to 2, but within 3 conversations or within 3 connections. Now, how do you measure that? And that could just be talking to different people, but how do we get that shared measurement? Because this starts getting into who owns it. And you've got, I toy around with this concept, and I can share a little bit about it, but around collective impact and backbone organizations, as far as having a central organization, which then doesn't necessarily own it as a central part, but then gets everybody on the same page. So can you imagine if every co-working space, every innovation hub, every accelerator program, every university, and every government department's economic development organization had a single metric that said, by the time somebody walks in my door, the clock's starting. And I need to get you to who you need to get to, even if it's not part of my organization, which is that cross spanning, within 3 jumps. And if I don't get you there within 3 jumps, I'm not doing my job. And if I don't get you there within 3 weeks, now obviously that can change if it's agriculture or pharmaceuticals or whatever the context is, but just something to keep them going. So I'd love to hear just around the room, we've got about 25 minutes left, the concept of what are some of the different types of metrics. We all know about, are they getting funding? Where are my startups now? How's my alumni doing? Are they trying to broaden it out? But is there something at an ecosystem level? Is there, and I dare say the word simple in a complex situation, is there a simple network type measurement? And how we measure that is a different story. We could talk on that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Is there something that we can just apply or inflict upon a region to say, how effective are we? How efficient are we at being an ecosystem from here to there? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's one of the best questions I've heard in a long time. I don't have an answer, but it's a great question.
Well, thanks, EJ. My work's done. Okay, we can go now.
But maybe we can talk about what's not working. I think, and there's the contextual issues in some local economies are more advanced than others. Arnobia, Startup Genome, called me up and was making fun of Idaho because we're using metrics for an advanced ecosystem when we're actually at the entry level. But that let me frame the question is, how do we know how the network is doing?
Yeah, so something along the effectiveness of our ecosystem, the efficiency.
How many people are connecting to whom, and are they quality interactions? I mean, social network analysis is pretty easy, pretty user friendly now.
I'm wondering if we could just ask the entrepreneurs. So this all sort of is, I guess, central to this is the entrepreneur actually making the connection that they need. So one possibility would be to ask the entrepreneur, and I don't know if this is being done. I could ask around Waterloo, by the way, if you would like, Chad, but I get the impression you already have been starting that. So maybe that's not necessary. But certainly the entrepreneurs would be a good keeper of that information. How many, how many leaps have they been, and also that I guess one concern about, or one, I guess, element of that particular metric that I think would be of importance to entrepreneurs also is the time. So there's value in taking time between connections in order to gather information about what that next connection is going to want to hear about. So kind of having an additional dimension of time and the quality of what happens during that time lag might be a consideration as well.
So I'm seeing that Michael put some stuff in the chat. The question that I also have before I read what Mike wrote is the challenge with entrepreneurs is just like a lot of people, they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. So I don't know what the value of my connection is. Sometimes because I'm connected with more people, like as a startup bootstrapping entrepreneur, if you connected me with 5 people, I'm going to think that that's a really good thing because now I'm connected with more people. But maybe 3 of those people send me down a rabbit hole or start answering questions that don't relate to my business. So I don't know what the impact is of that. So is it a connection that actually leads to something and I won't know until I get to a certain part? Or do I just grow my network and it's like, throwing buckshot out there, or whatever analogy you'd like to put that's probably a little bit more amicable. But Mike said, are we measuring starts, training, funding, networks, chatter, or interactions? The network interaction value valuable if we do not have starts. So so for me, I would say I didn't launch. And part of that is because I met the people along the way who recognized and were nice enough to squish my dream, right? My entrepreneurial dream, but probably make me focus on the things that I'm good at, which is the ecosystem building part of it, and not necessarily the startup part of it. So that in itself was a value, but how do you measure that? Because if you tell me that I didn't launch and that makes me one of those statistics, then I'll tell you that I will add to your data in a very different way. So is startup nominal or trends up or down? You're going to have to get a microphone, I swear. Is my ecosystem and the interviews with entrepreneurs tell me that there is a lousy network? Yes. And ecosystems in our area, but the players in the ecosystem all tell me it's fabulous. That's usually because they're talking about themselves. That's an ecosystem, right? And then they do this great job. So I love all that you said, Mike, and really we're going to have you call in.
So the way that we've kind of approached this, which is a little bit different, and it's funny because even the commonality I heard there is talking to entrepreneurs. So again, Peoria, Chad, and it sounds very similar in the way that 160,000, it's kind of on the burbs in comparison to the Phoenix metro area. We actually did a measurement of the broader community. So we actually had, and we tried to split it where it was overwhelmingly people who didn't identify as entrepreneurs, as well as entrepreneurs. And we kept it pretty simple in this connectivity metric of, here are the 5 main things you need to start a business. How many either entrepreneurs or resources do you know you could ask about funding? How many do you know that you could ask about HR? How many? So what we were trying to get there was not just how many people do you know, but do you have a diversity of resources you could pull from? And we actually kept the 2 measurements separate of not just the resources. And then we went through and said, hey, have you ever used these resources? Do you know of them? But then we also had just one high level measure that said, how many other entrepreneurs do you know? And so a lot of the resource, it doesn't matter resources, right? It's, do you know other peers? And can you ask them questions? What's your availability to them? So we've actually been tracking, can we move the needle on, does the average person, because again, early stage, so we can't even, we've been looking at the ventures we've been helping, but as an ecosystem across the board, if somebody has an idea, do they know who to go? Do they have enough resources to go to? And is there a diversity in that? And are we moving the needle, which fundamentally changes even like the training discussion. We hold things in the libraries, right? And instead of participation metrics, now it's a question of, it's not just you coming to the library. In that library meeting, did we explain to you other diverse resources? Did we connect you with 2 or 3 other entrepreneurs? We actually actively go out and try to do mentor matchmaking. And so it's been a real shift from the finite on connectivity and focusing, because it's so early stage. You're like, if we're measuring only entrepreneurs that are walking through the door that are creating jobs, that's not going to have the effect that we're looking for to raise the entire community. So that's the way we've approached it.
Thanks for that, Kristen. And so when you say we, like you and your organization owns that data, owns the approach, is really driving it. If your organization didn't exist, then that initiative wouldn't be happening. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the process, and it's not, we've been hired again by the city of Peoria. So yes, ASU, E&I owns the data. However, we've been incredibly open, and the city of Peoria is usually pretty good about expanding. What is Norris doing? Expanding the data and kind of sharing the information that's out there. So it's relatively open, but we're also just the only player out in the West Valley that's kind of looking at it.
And so, will there be something else that's created from that owns the data, or will it always sit within uni funded by government? Because the next evolution of this, we could say, is all this stuff is happening, but you're developing it not for the actual metrics, but you're developing it, much like we're talking about our separate metrics conversations around the project, we're developing it to establish the process and the entity by which metrics will be managed. And so the actual metrics you come up with are almost secondary to the process by which it's being created. And that collaboration, which is uni and government, and ideally you get some industry behind it and some risk capital, which then can also feed into that separate entity. Is that a thought that's happening as the next level?
Yes and no, in the way that, you know, even my presence and why I've been tasked, like making sure that we're part of Kaufman conversations across the board are, I think there's a dedication to how do we measure this? What do the metrics look like? How do we move forward? So we've been very transparent on that. There's no goal of like, oh, this is our thing and we want to own it. We don't want to own the data towards it. And I think the approach has been more, let's prove this out like internally and figure out if this works, because we're measuring lots of other metrics, but this is the first time we're playing with it. And then open it up on a broader like case study, talking to people, what does it look like? And it's funny because yes, we own it, but even the survey, and we've been sending it out, we sent it out to all of the partners. So we actually have a fairly, you know, all of the partners being the 10 of them, right? But there's still like 10 of them that have been sending it out to their networks, and we provide some of that information and feedback. So it's still early stage, and I would say we just haven't gotten to a point of sophistication, like that's on the radar. It's just not there yet because we're still testing it.
Excellent. Thanks, Kristen. And thanks, Christina, for that comment about the article from Stangler. And that was one of the first, excuse me, ecosystem, excuse me, one of the first ecosystem papers that then also focused on flow and fluidity as a concept as well, which led into some of the network measures, and that we see some of that flowing through genome at the moment. We've got about 15 minutes left. Happy to hear from a couple of others' thoughts that have been percolating away as you've been hearing the conversations, and we'll probably wrap up at about 5 till give a bit of an update on the project and talk about the next call. So anyone else who's kind of had thoughts and ideas and inputs from what people have been sharing?
Just quickly, the province recently launched a platform called Start Alberta, and it's collaborative, so it's not necessarily government owned. There's a bunch of stakeholders. And what's really interesting about it is the carrot to the person to sign up is essentially get connected with a bunch of venture capitalists, which tends to be what the entrepreneurs think they need. But in doing it, we get to collect you know, people, organizations, companies, and there's little profiles for each. And one of the interesting pieces in there that Kristen mentioned was the importance of measuring or collecting the programs that entrepreneurs have already gone through to understand the funnel and to make sure that there aren't gaps in the ecosystem or where the strengths or weaknesses are. And this is also tremendously beneficial to track those that are perhaps sucking the life out of the ecosystem. Because right now I would say that there's a surplus of resources as we're trying to kickstart the economy and the startup ecosystem. And so we want to keep track of those that haven't progressed necessarily, but keep sucking resources out of the community. So that's been kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Jen. Jen, are you engaged with Hockey Stick at all out of Canada?
No.
All right. Hockey Stick's a really innovative and interesting platform that kind of emerged over the last few years, where it actually gets down to the program level, collects their data, they use it to send out surveys, and then it de-identifies and aggregates it across the top for reporting. It's one of the things I've based my platform out of Australia on. So I'd be interested to see, because I know they're big in some aspects of Canada. But you also raised that interesting point as far as kind of who just consumes, and tracking that, what I like to refer to as the neural pathway of the innovation ecosystem, as you see people jump to jump, because quite often whoever touches them last gets the credit on, hey, we helped out this company. But you know that way back then, that co-working space in a regional area may be producing 80% of our startups, and we don't even know about it because they don't get the media until 2 or 3 years later. Are you getting some findings even in the early days?
I unfortunately don't have access to the data. It's just something that I'm watching from afar, and my husband actually has been working on it. So I'll ask him and get back to you.
That'd be great, thanks.
I'll check into Hockey Stick. Thanks so much for letting me know about that.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, Ray's good there. Let me know if you need some input into that.
Can I make an observation here? We've been trying to measure things for about 12 years in Arizona, and it's gone through this evolution at the state level. Well, at the local level with ESHIP too. We found that if we didn't start from the bottom of the funnel or the top, depending on how you're looking at the funnel, of what the ultimate impact that you're trying to achieve is, And so at the state level, the top of the funnel is economic prosperity, jobs, rising wages. And then when you start to measure the metrics, everything can be tied to that. If you disconnect it, you start from lower level, you start to measure activities and intangibles that make the ecosystem builder the functional person feel good. Measuring number of network connections and all that makes you feel good, but it doesn't mean anything unless you're connecting it to whatever your ultimate impact is. And so if you take this to any other entity like an accelerator or something like that, once they start measuring satisfaction, or at ASU we started to measure entrepreneurial experiences, that's great, but if it's not connected to the impact that you want to have, it's going to get out of hand. And that leads me to the question that I've been wanting to ask here. Is there some place in our metrics where we decided here are the ranked order of impact metrics for ecosystems? Is there something there? It doesn't have to be the priority order because every ecosystem might be different, but have we just ranked like impact measurement so that way later we can discover what other things we have to measure?
That's a fantastic question, CJ, and it's the first time I've actually heard it as far as actually creating a value on different metrics. There's heaps of lists of metrics out there. Here's a massive just wall of type 8 font of different things we can measure, but actually asking providers to measure how valuable they are. And one of the ones that, as you were talking, makes me think about what we started off this question of, it's that progress. And it's almost like, which would kill some of the zombies that are sucking the life out of the ecosystem. Like, are you making progress? Have you gotten from here to there to something meaningful? What is that? Are we actually growing, or are we just doing activity? A bunch of kindergartners running around the racetrack, getting really fast, or are we, are we getting into high school at all?
Well, you mentioned growing the ecosystem, and it sounds good, but the question is growing the ecosystem going to lead to the kind of impact? I mean, I'm sure it does, but if growth is something to measure, but growth for growth's sake may not be the impact that an ecosystem wants to have. It may be something else. So that's why that's when I mentioned at the very beginning, it's one of my big issues. A lot of organizations and ecosystems put out impact reports, but it's not the same impact that they started out by saying that they wanted to measure. And so that's kind of my, I don't want to say issue, but that's where the confusion is if we're measuring things and they're not connected to the ultimate outcome, then it's just an activity.
Yes, CJ, you sound like the joke about the drunk lost his keys, but he's looking under the street lamp and said, "But you didn't drop the keys here." Yeah, but I got the lamp I can see. We pick up data, just they're using data that's convenient. They may not. It's free. It's handy. I keep thinking a lot of places are going to say jobs and similar statistics that are lagging indicators of all this. If I could channel my inner Alistair, is how do we figure out what the leading indicators are? And that means we need to have some better models of this.
Well, and
I think it would be fascinating to see how people would differ on what they thought was important.
What I'll ask in there too, Norris, is jobs has been, I think, what we could say people have been saying is the thing we need to measure for the last 10 or 15 years. And we've seen the consequences of that, which is an increasing divide in actual equity and entrepreneurship and an evolution of it. So I think that's always the danger of, well, what are we all working towards? We're all working towards jobs. Yeah, jobs are a measurement, and to this point of why we're all here, that tends to skew towards a very specific type of business with a very specific type of outcome. Yeah. I think getting any sort of broad buy-in on what are we all working towards is the base of the problem that we have, because we've got a lot of different definitions on what we're all working towards.
Well, I actually don't think it needs to be one answer, one metric. Every ecosystem can prioritize what they think is important. Some Silicon Valley has jobs, so now they should probably, well, it might make sense that they prioritize something else as number one, maybe diversity, include, or ethics, or something as a metric that you can measure.
Well, there's a policy. I mean, there's a policy debate that's brewing. The SBA has shown that it's new and innovative small businesses that in every country on earth leads economies out of the doldrums. But there's a counter argument that we should be focusing all of our resources on the high growth, high tech companies. And again, they think, and there's persuasive data for both, as it turns out, is, maybe there's something we can contribute to that conversation. But it certainly is going to be a hot topic going forward.
And this conversation is kind of, it lends itself to the inevitable outcome of saying to what end. So we measure, but to what end? And then that starts getting to the actual betterment of humanity. But we also have to be conscious that that's presuming that innovation ecosystems are what we call normative, that they're actually a good thing in different regions. And some of us have been involved in situations where we inflict an innovation ecosystem onto an area that, they may say, look, that's just not where we're at right now. And everybody's at different stages, as CJ says. But some of the interesting things that have come up in this conversation, as far as approaches to measurement, how we measure, I love the concept of ranking the metrics. So even as a project, we've got just 3 minutes left, so we'll wrap up just a brief update on a project, but even as one to come out, as an additional one to add to our list, if anybody wants to raise their hand, just we're already coming up with something to come up with the definitions and the process by which we come up with definitions. What is a job? What is an entrepreneur? What is a startup? There's a lot of definitions out there. Some people agree, but just coming up with a definitive process on that. But another one is, what are the what are the different metrics we can have and what is the value of those? And then to the point coming up in the chat right now with Christina's comment is, then how does that then vary based on the stage that the ecosystem's at? And what's appropriate for an ecosystem at one stage may not be at another. Just a brief update on the other project we have. CJ's been providing some, is going to be providing a repository of listed definitions around entrepreneur as a starting point. Valto, who's on these calls usually, is coming up with a process by which we establish definitions of entrepreneurs. And then we're just going to be running that through a mill to just have a one place repository to say, here's here's all the definitions that we know of, but then here's a process by which those can be changed and refined and crowdsourced it as a bit of an experiment. And hoping the next 3 months we can then have a bit of a pilot on that one.
Clarifying here though, is I'm working on definitions. You asked me to work on several things, entrepreneurship and related definitions, number one. Number two is a repository of popular and relevant definitions, of definitions made by the experts. Who are the experts and the history? This is what I was asked to do, not necessarily what I wanted to do. And then the last part is that I'm putting this in the ESHIP wiki. I'll repost the link, which leads us to process. We can develop a separate process, but the wiki process does lend itself to people contributing, to discussing, to editing, to refining. So,
excellent. Thanks, EJ. Perfect. Cecilia, I might just wrap it up and hand over to you to close us out, because we're about 1 minute to the top of the hour.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And for those of you who are new to these calls, we have 8 of them a month. So the 7 ESHIP goals, as well as a storytelling call. So you're welcome to join any and all of them as your energy allows. The ESHIP Summit this year will be virtual. So through the comforts of wherever the heck you may be, whether you're hiking on a mountain in Colorado or sitting somewhere in Australia, you can join us. That schedule will be out soon. There will be a call going out for presentations. We're just refining the language around that. So anybody who would like to share out on things that you're working on, all kinds of things. That's a possibility, and that should be going out soon. The ESHIP Summit is September 15th and 16th. For those of you, I think we're exploring. CJ's got all of the stuff going on with Wiki about knowledge and knowledge sharing. We do have a Slack channel. We have the Facebook page and all of that. But there seems to be some interesting ideas around what communication looks like when you're in a community that's all over the world. And so Goal 4 call, Connected Networks, on Wednesday, will take the ESHIP community as a case study and kind of look into what a communication tool could, should, and would look like for a community such as ours, where, you know, maybe because I'm old school, I really miss having an old school forum where I could search topics and follow a thread and maybe have some stuff pinned, but that's just probably a lot to do with my comfort as well. But I'm curious to know what all of you think, because communication is paramount to building community. So I think I've gone over by a minute. Thank you so much for your time and energy, and we'll record the call and put it on the dashboard, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks.
So
Have
thanks
a great
all.
rest of your day. Bye.